Welcome back, I'm Nick, and this is the wrap-up that nobody asked for. Because I'm a bit late to the booktube game and I just started my channel in March, I'm going to go ahead and do a January and February wrap-up. So here is all the books that I've read so far this year. Now several of these I did borrow from my local library. I tend to use that a lot, so any of the ones that I don't currently have in my possession, I will put a picture right here. So the first book that I'm going to talk about, I actually started at the end of 2018, but I didn't finish it until this year. So technically it was my first read of the year. And that is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. For those of you who may not know, Crooked Kingdom is the second book in the Six of Crows duology, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Now I know pretty much everybody on BookTube and their mom has read the Six of Crows duology. I just read it for the first time this year, but I love it. Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom have become some of my favorite books of all time, and Crooked Kingdom might actually be my new all-time favorite book. It was that good. The Six of Crows duology is actually part of the Grishaverse, which started off with the Shadow and Bone trilogy. Six of Crows is essentially a heist novel that follows 6 characters, and Crooked Kingdom is the sequel to that, which just kind of follows the shenanigans after the fact. It was phenomenal. Everybody should read this duology. You will really be doing yourself a favor. If you've already read it, then you know exactly how good it is. Now, the second book that I read in January was Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha and Ngan. I did borrow this from the library, so I don't have a physical copy, so I'll put the picture here, but I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Now, this was one of my most anticipated reads of 2018, but I wasn't able to get it from the library until January, so it did fall into my 2019 reads. I was a little bit disappointed just because I did have such high expectations going into this novel. It was still good, don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed it, but it wasn't everything that I was expecting. Now, it is an Asian-inspired fantasy which takes place in a magical world where there are 3 castes. One is all human, one is half human, half demon, and one is full demon. The king is full demon, and they are kind of the ones who are in power. They look down upon the humans, which I did find interesting because the demon part is like animals, and it was very interesting to see the animals treating the humans like how we would treat animals in the real world. Our main character, Leigh, does get chosen against her will to become a concubine for the Demon King, so the story kind of follows her going through that journey. Now, there is a big trigger warning for sexual assault, which I do think was very important to include in this novel because so many people, especially teen girls, which is the target audience, go through this, unfortunately. I'm not going to go super into my thoughts because I did have a lot of pros and cons. However, I will be linking my Goodreads review in the description below, so you can check that out where I go a bit more in detail. Overall, it was a very atmospheric read. I did enjoy my time with it, and I will absolutely be reading the sequel. The next book that I read in January was actually a reread for me, and that was The Titan's Curse by Riordan. This is actually my 3rd time reading the novel, and I did end up listening to the audiobook this time around for the whole series. For those of you who may not know, the Percy Jackson series is essentially a modern retelling of what would happen if the Greek gods still existed. However, the audiobook was not good. Overall, I still had a good time with the series. Of course, I gave the book 5 out of 5 stars because I will never give the series anything less than 5 out of 5 stars because it is that good, and it is very nostalgic for me, but also the writing is just phenomenal. The next book that I read in January was Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. After reading the Six of Crows duology, knowing that King of Scars was coming up, I knew that I needed to read the original Grisha trilogy because I had never read it before, and I wanted to be prepared for the release of King of Scars. Now, I get why there's such polarizing opinions of this series. I think if I had read it back when it first came out, I would have loved it a lot more. The first book was written in 2012, and it is a bit obvious, as now it does seem a bit tropey. However, back then the tropes were probably very new. I did give it 3 stars. I still enjoyed it. I just didn't think that it was the best book in the world. The Grisha trilogy follows a girl named Alina, as she discovers that instead of being a normal girl like she always thought she was, she's actually a Grisha and ends up being the Sun Summoner, which is very rare and hasn't been seen in a very, very long time. I'm not going to go too into the summary. I'm just going to hop right into the next book that I read, which is Siege and Storm, which is the second book in the Grisha trilogy, and I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars as well. Not a whole lot happens in this book. The best part of the book, honestly, is Nikolai. He carried the entire book because there was so much doing nothing that without him, the book would have been terrible. All I'm gonna say is there's a love square, not here for it. Alina's a bit too boring to have 3 different men pining after her. It was unnecessary. Now after that, I did need a palate cleanser, so I started the audiobook for Battle of the Labyrinth by Riordan. Again, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It's a phenomenal book. While the first book in the series will always hold a special place in my heart, the 4th and 5th books are really where this series peaks for me. I had a wonderful time back in this story, and though I did still have many qualms about the audiobooks, I still enjoyed my time. The next book that I'm going to talk about, I actually didn't give a rating as it is a children's nonfiction and I just couldn't figure out a suitable rating for it. But that book is Not So Different, What You Really Want to Ask About Having a Disability by Burcaw. Now, I actually discovered Shane on YouTube. I followed his vlogs of him and his girlfriend Hannah, as they are a interabled couple, and they vlog about their life, the different struggles with his disability. Shane has muscular dystrophy, and essentially he's been in a wheelchair his entire life and needs help to do pretty much everything. I adore them as a couple. I love seeing their day-to-day life and how they handle different situations, so I really wanted to read his book, as he does have 2 out currently and 1 more on the way. After that, I read Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo, and I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is the final book in the original Grisha trilogy. There is a lot of mixed reviews on how it ends. Personally, I actually liked the ending. I thought it fit the story pretty well. I was pretty surprised by it. I thought I knew exactly how it would end because I had read Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom before this, but I was still surprised. After this, I did read the short novella The Tailor, which is a very short story which takes place during Shadow and Bone but told from Genya's point of view. I ended up giving this 4 stars because I think it was the most interesting thing about the trilogy and I adore Genya. Also, while we didn't learn anything new from it, it did give us a bit of insight into how Genya was feeling during this time. The last book that I read in January was The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. Clearly, this was the month of Leigh Bardugo for me. I did give this 5 out of 5 stars. It is a collection of novellas, which while being a part of the Grishaverse, you don't actually have to read any of the prior books to understand it. Leigh uses the language of Thorns to tell the fairy tales as people in the Grishaverse would have heard them growing up. Most of them were new takes on beloved fairy tales, such as The Nutcracker and The Little Mermaid. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was phenomenal. I loved my experience with each tale. I started off trying to review them individually, however I ended up giving every single one of them either 4.5 or 5 out of 5 stars. It was magical, it was beautiful, the writing was fantastic, the storylines were great. They really sucked you in, and it really felt like it would be something that I would have been told as a child. The first book that I read in February was Laughing at My Nightmare by Burcaw. Though I'm not really sure how to rate nonfiction, I did end up giving this 4 stars. This was Shane's first novel and is essentially a memoir about his life, his struggles with his disease, and how he founded his nonprofit organization, which has the same name, Laughing at My Nightmare. The only reason I didn't give this 5 stars was because the timeline was a bit jumbled. It hopped around a lot and wasn't written chronologically. However, I loved reading the stories about Shane's childhood and really gave me a lot more insight into his life. Before I read this book, I was looking at some reviews and a couple people had pointed out that he seemed a bit prejudiced towards other disabled people, especially those with mental disabilities. However, when I actually read the novel for myself, I don't think that's the case at all. Now, I don't know Shane personally, I don't know his beliefs and what he thinks, but from my point of view, the way he discussed certain situations in the book was very much how he thought about things as they happened. Most of his stories, including other disabled people, take place from childhood up into his early teenage years. None of us share the same views that we did when we were a teenager, and he does address that he was wrong and that he does not think the same way that he used to. Next up, I actually read a graphic novel called Sleepless by Vaughn. This was volume 1, and supposedly we're supposed to be getting volume 2 in March of this year. However, I haven't actually heard anything about it, but I really hope that's the case because I adored volume 1. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Sleepless takes place in a fantasy kingdom following Lady Poppy as she is the estranged daughter of a king who has recently passed away. It also follows her knight, Cyrenik, who is a sleepless knight. Now they are exactly as they sound, they do not sleep. They are pledged to one person and protect them. And though it is rare, it is possible for sleepless nights to essentially go crazy from lack of sleep. The story follows Poppy and Cyrenik as he starts to lose his mind. And it left on the biggest cliffhanger, and I need volume 2 immediately. This was so good. The art was phenomenal. It was so beautiful to look at, and the storyline was so unique in my opinion. If you're able to go read this, you absolutely should. The next book that I read in February was King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. Can we just take a moment to appreciate this gorgeous cover? I think this is the prettiest cover I have ever seen in my life. I did rate this 5 out of 5 stars. However, upon further reflection, I might drop it down to 4.5. I definitely loved it. I was so excited for it. It was one of my most anticipated books of the year. So I'm so happy that I got to read it right when it came out. Now, King of Scars follows Nikolai, who is the new king, and it takes place a couple years after the original Grisha trilogy and just a few months after the events of Crooked Kingdom. I can see why a lot of people didn't love this book. It is a bit slower and it is very political. There's definitely not as much action as in the Six of Crows duology. However, I enjoyed every minute of it. Towards the end of the Grisha trilogy, I did end up really liking Zoya, and after reading King of Scars, I am absolutely in love with her. She is my queen. And now I'm Zoya-like trash. The next book that I read, Blue Lily, Lily Blue by Maggie Stiefvater. Y'all really had me out here thinking that this was a good book and that this was a good series. I don't know if I just read a completely different series as everyone else. I gave this 2.5 out of 5 stars. The Raven cycle follows 4 boys and 1 girl who are trying to wake up a dead king. I will say the novels are very atmospheric. It is magical realism, and Maggie Stiefvater is very good at taking our world and making it magical. However, that's pretty much where my enjoyment ends. I gave the first 2 books in this series about 3 stars each, but I don't really understand why Blue Lily, Lily Blue is the favorite amongst readers. It jumped around so much. It felt like I was playing a video game and kept doing so many side quests that I completely lost track of the main quests, because I don't even know what happened in this book or what the purpose was. Editing Nick here. I just wanted to point out one of the biggest things that really bugged me about the time skips that I forgot to mention in this video is that we spent literally all this time from the first book waiting to hear about what happened with Adam and his dad, and we finally get to the courtroom scene. It skips over. The judge is like, alright, let's begin, and then it stops, and then we literally don't hear about what happens for the rest of the book. I did listen to the audiobook for this, and honestly, that is the only reason that I've made it so far in the series and even plan on reading The Raven King. The narrator is phenomenal, and unfortunately I probably won't read any of the other books he's narrated because they are all either very obscure or Stephen King. And personally, I don't really read horror. I might dive into Stephen King one day, but the chances are slim to none. I will put a link down in the description below to my Goodreads review where I go a bit more in detail on my feelings of this book. Be warned, I use a lot of video game analogies. I'm not sure why. It just happened. The last 4 books I'm going to talk about are all in the same series, and that is Shatter Me by Tahereh Mafi. Now, the first book was actually a reread for me. I read it about this time last year, and originally I gave it 4 stars. However, this time around I gave it 3. I know a lot of people complain about the writing style, however, that's really why I enjoyed it so much. It's beautiful, it's very lyrical and flowery, and though at times I felt like it was a bit overdone, overall it really fit the mood of the story. Originally, I hadn't planned on continuing on with this series and planned on just unhauling the whole thing because I didn't think that I would ever get to continue it. However, I am a very mood-based reader and wanted to pick up the series again on a whim after seeing a tweet that Tahereh Mafi put out. Now, if you haven't read the Shatter Me series or plan on reading it, then this is going to get a little spoilery, so you might just want to click out because the rest of the books that I'm going to talk about in this video are all going to be spoilery and are all part of the same series. Tahereh replied to a tweet of a fan asking about Warnet and replied with a confirmation about the new novel. I did not know that Warnet was going to be canon ever. However, that is exactly what made me pick up the rest of the series to continue. Next, I did read Unravel Me, which is the second book in the series. I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I do think I was a bit generous with the ratings for this series. I actually did have to bring it down a little bit after thinking about it objectively. I definitely had a very good time reading these, and I am absolute Warnet trash. However, looking at it logically, these books aren't that great. It is a dystopian, which typically I don't read dystopian very much. It's not really my cup of tea. However, these are very character driven. After Unravel Me, I did read the first novella in the Unite Me bind-up, and that was Destroy Me. Now this takes place from Warner's view after the events of the first book in the series. I did actually read this after I read Shatter Me for the first time, so this was a reread for me. However, reading it after the events of Unravel Me really enlightened me to certain things that went on. I love Warner so much. I did end up giving this 4 stars. I think Warner is such a complex character, and I loved seeing things from his point of view, and it was even better the second time around. The last book that I read was Ignite Me, which is the last book in the original Shatter Me trilogy. There is a 4th book out now, however, it was supposed to end after Ignite Me originally. I did end up giving this 3.75 out of 5 stars, however, I do think that is generous. This book had a lot of sitting around in it, and the final battle took place in the last 30 pages of the book. Like I said, I am Warnet trash, and I would die for Warner, so I enjoyed this book a lot. Do I think that a 17-year-old who has been isolated for most of her life is the perfect choice to rule a country? Absolutely not. However, I am currently reading Restore Me, and I am pretty excited to see where the rest of the series goes. Alright guys, that is the end of my wrap up. Overall, I read 18 books, 10 in January and 8 in February. I do think that I've had a pretty good reading year so far. Last year at this time I read I think 3 books, so I'm pretty much on track. Comment down below if you've read any of these books or if you're looking forward to reading any of these books. Also, I'd love to hear what you're currently reading. Well, that's all I have for you, so see you next time.